Well, let's start with this. Senator McLaurin, thank you for joining us in the Georgia vote here.
Happy to be here.
Let's start here. One of the biggest topics in the legislative session so far, and certainly Governor Kemp's top priority, is what he's describing as tort reform. On the show this week, we're hearing from Senate President Pro Tem John Kennedy. He's an outspoken supporter of so-called tort reform. Where do you stand on tort reform?
So the way that the bill is drafted, I'm opposed. There are a lot of conversations to be had about the insurance industry and insurance premiums. Nobody wants to see insurance premiums keep going up. But the question is, what can we do about that realistically from a public policy standpoint? Now, the business community, the large corporations, and now a lot of small businesses have been asking for tort reform at Governor Kemp's request. He went to a chamber breakfast earlier this year and he said, go get your people, go back to your local chambers, get everybody fired up, come to the Capitol. And he is using his political capital in a very dramatic way to try to advance this agenda. It looks like we're going to have a floor vote tomorrow in the Senate on this, and so by the time this airs, that Senate vote may have already happened. But let me break down what I think is really happening. Insurance companies make billions of dollars in profit, with a B, and they may claim, oh, but we lose money on paying out claims sometimes. It kind of doesn't matter, because across the 50 states, and in the big picture, it's billions with a B, and they have investment income. So separate and apart from paying out claims, they're basically like banks. They've got tons of money that they make money on, and at the end of the day, they're very profitable. So what insurance companies, and again, we don't know exactly how many or which insurance companies have told the insurance commissioner or the governor this, but they're basically threatening and saying, if you don't pass us some kind of tort reform, we're going to leave this state, or we're not going to cover certain lines of insurance policies. Well, those are threats, and I can see the business community is responding to those threats, because what else would they do? But the insurance companies are basically saying that the source of all their problems and the reason that rates keep going up is because of people who get injured. So, you know, if you're in a car accident, or if a medical procedure goes wrong, or a number of other ways that people end up getting hurt, and really seriously hurt sometimes. I mean, we talk a lot about the McDonald's coffee example from many years ago, where people thought, oh, it's just hot coffee, why would she get paid? People don't realize in that case that the woman who had coffee in her lap had severe, nth degree burns that completely disfigured her. And so I think there needs to be an understanding by the public that we're talking about injured people. We're talking about people who can be horribly disfigured and sometimes killed by the negligence, the misconduct of businesses. And so, of course, when somebody brings a lawsuit and a business has to defend it, ultimately it ends up being the insurance company who has liability insurance policies with the business. So it's not like the business directly gets hit, it's the insurance company that eventually has to pay out. So to kind of bring all the threads together, you've got insurance companies who don't like that they're paying out money in claims. They would rather deny claims. I mean, we've got a nationwide movement right now of people who are upset at insurance companies, not just in the health insurance space, but look at Hurricane Helene, where there are reports that insurance companies are not paying out to people who are devastated by these natural disasters. I mean, I think even a Republican Senator, Josh Hawley, had raised the issue about hearing that claims were being denied in those cases. So people understand very well that insurance companies are seeking to protect their profit any means they can. My big concern about the tort reform legislation is it's essentially the insurance companies threatening the Georgia corporate community and Brian Kemp and saying, if you don't take away this one source of our claim losses, then we will leave the state or keep increasing your premiums or whatever. What I would like to see, and what some of my Democratic colleagues would like to see, is we're calling insurance reform, which is we need to hold the insurance companies accountable. If they have a policy with you that you've been dutifully paying premiums on, they need to cover you, their end of the bargain, when you get hurt or when you have a loss. They have been unwilling to do that historically. And these billions of dollars of profit, with a B, they need to be accountable for returning some of those profits in the form of premium rebates and refusing to increase premiums when things are going well for those big insurance companies. So that's the conversation that I think we should be having. Obviously, Brian Kemp has framed it in terms of this tort reform issue that is about the little guy, but I think we need to be having a completely different conversation about insurance.
Let's tease this out a little bit, and tell me if you think I'm misrepresenting anything here,
Sure.
because this is a sort of broad, I don't want to say nebulous topic, but when people say tort reform, I mean, even you're talking about it as tort reform, different people have different definitions of what we're talking about here. But let me try to tease this out. And understanding that you are an attorney and other folks who might be watching might not be. Governor Kemp and his supporters argue that through, in many cases, what they view as excessive jury verdicts, insurance premiums have gone up in our state over the recent however many years. They are in turn proposing this tort reform package that they say will limit the amount people in certain cases can recover if they succeed in a civil suit. And they say that those limits then in turn would reduce insurance premiums.
So that's their story.
Right.
Right.
So that's where that's just so we're level setting here.
Right.
That's their argument. Your response to that would be what?
A couple things. First of all, ask yourself why 6 or 12 randomly selected people from your community in a jury would do the wrong thing when put in a position to decide how much harm has happened, right? The cases that go to these so-called nuclear verdicts, you'll hear that as a scare word thrown around, these big verdicts that some juries, again, this is pretty rare, the bigger verdicts over, tens of millions of dollars, that sort of thing. These are juries that are told the whole story from start to finish, not sound bites. I mean, you and I get to talk for 5 minutes, but if you sit in a jury room and you listen to evidence over the course of weeks about how a corporation knew that they built a defective product that could hurt people, or a trucking company refused to train its drivers even though they knew that there was a certain risk factor with their trucks operating a certain way, right? A lot of times when a big verdict comes down, it's because the jury in question has presented evidence that the corporation knew that it was doing something wrong, and it knew that it was saving money maybe by cutting corners, and that might hurt people. And then when the insurance company got the claim, the insurance company knew that it was probably a good claim, but stretched out some family that doesn't have means to hire, whatever lawyers for years, potentially 2, 3 or more years, to try to delay and deny the claims until finally the family gets to a courtroom after years of waiting, tells the jury everything that's happened, and the jury gets mad. This is not a surprising thing. And these verdicts actually don't happen as often as you would think. Again, if you set the baseline, I say billions with a B for a reason. If insurance companies are making over $10 billion in profit in Georgia alone, and we've got a handful of verdicts every year that are between $10 and $100 million, do the math, right? That math doesn't add up to the amount of profit that the insurance companies are making. So what you're really seeing is the insurance companies using a political window here. This is really the answer, is why are we seeing it this year? We have all been talking about inflation for the last, 2 years, 3 years. And look, there have been lots of political arguments about why inflation was happening, but we all agree that prices have gone up, costs have gone up. So certainly the cost to insure all of those things has also gone up. So premiums have gone up. So if you're the insurance companies, and the costs are going up, everyone's premiums are going up, what better year to pick than to make this ultimatum to Kemp and the business community and say, this is happening because of our scapegoat, we're going to blame these plaintiffs and these lawsuits, and we're going to get tort reform. Now, in other states where the insurance industry has been successful in getting tort reform passed, look at states like Tennessee, Florida, Texas, there's states around the country, the premiums don't go down. And so when you ask point blank in committee, legislatively here at the Capitol, or in other means, other channels, hey, insurance companies, if we give you what you're demanding and we do this tort reform, will our rates come down? They say, oh, well, we can't guarantee it'll be next year. Maybe it'll take a few years. And we can't guarantee that the rates will definitely come down, right? So again, this is kind of a Occam's razor. What's the easiest explanation here, right? Are insurance companies really about to leave the state because they are being harassed by a handful of big verdicts per year? Or are they using a political moment, a window where inflation is on everybody's minds, to try to get the same program done that they've done in other states to pad their profits even more?
So your view on this is that tort reform as presented right now, it would not reduce insurance premiums, and it would reduce the likelihood that people who are legitimately hurt can fully recover their damages.
That's it. All it means is that family that doesn't have money to pay for a lawyer by the hour, that is waiting 2-3 years, and meanwhile, probably going to the doctor, to the hospital to get treatment for whatever injury happened to them, is going through one of the worst moments of their life, even putting the lawsuit to the side, right? They're waiting 2 to 3 years to see if the business that caused the harm and the insurance company that is obligated by contract to pay for that harm, to see if they're going to do the right thing. And only when they get to a courtroom at the end of that years-long wait is there even a chance that a jury can help them do the right thing. So that's one reason I bring up the jury too, is the Governor Kemp and the business community behind him are asking us to distrust our neighbor's judgment. Who wants to go do jury duty, right? It's not like you've got people out there who are rushing to go into a courtroom and do a nuclear verdict all of a sudden, right? These are people who have been drawn from all walks of life, who have been presented the evidence neutrally on both sides and come to the conclusion that a certain amount of money is appropriate to either compensate or punish based on the amount of harm that's happened. And so let me make it a little bigger picture. In a country that's so polarized, when we're talking about whether we trust our neighbors or not, we're seeking to form more bonds. I don't want to make a vote that's based on the premise that I can't trust my neighbor's judgment about what happens in a courtroom when they get to hear all the evidence.
One last point on tort reform that I think is worth addressing, and then we can move on to some other topics. But I think this is worth teasing out here. You mentioned one of the things about a jury trial is that the jury gets to hear the full story. You're an attorney. You know that the rules of evidence preclude some things from coming in before the jury.
Right.
And I bring that up not to say that you were misleading there, but just to make sure we kind of footnote here and come back to it. You know that the rules of evidence preclude some things from coming before a jury. Tort reform, as proposed right now, one of the elements is to reconfigure what kinds of information can go before a jury or not. And I think some proponents of tort reform might say that under the package proposed, jurors may get an actually fuller sense of not only all that happened, but also the levels of culpability by all the different actors involved. What would you say to that?
Sure. So there's rules of evidence. You go to law school, and some of this stuff comes from like England when we formed as a country. There are certain guidelines to keep the jury focused on what really matters. I mean, think about it this way. If you could say literally anything in a courtroom and just talk about somebody's dirty laundry or, all of their personal drama that has nothing to do with the case, you could inflame people against somebody without it having anything to do with the facts, right?
Could be prejudicial.
Yeah, that is the word used in courtrooms, right? And so now all evidence is prejudicial. This is a fun line from law school. All evidence is prejudicial because it tends to favor one side or the other. The real question is whether it's unduly prejudicial, whether we as a society have decided the type of evidence is so inflammatory relative to the benefit that it gives the jury that we don't allow it. So yeah, there are guardrails, just like, in football you can't throw it out of bounds, right? There's rules to any game that are common sense and based on what reasonable people need to make a good decision. What is happening, to your point, is that the tort reform bill is trying to tweak those rules slightly to favor the defense side of things instead of the plaintiff. And so you've actually raised a really good point here about the disconnect between the way this bill is being sold to the public versus what's actually in it. Because you've got doctors, you've got all kinds of people coming to the Capitol saying, our med-mal premiums are increasing, these premiums are going up. I'm not even sure the word premium is in the bill, right? I mean, what you see in the bill are these very technical little tweaks to the court system to favor one side more over the other. Why? Because the insurance companies don't want to pay out. And so they would rather go to the legislature and have the rules of the game changed, almost like moving the out of bounds line in the football field, rather than confront their own customers and do the right thing by their own customers and pay under the contracts that they agreed to.
This is a good time to pivot to something else I want to ask you about. You brought up inflation a moment ago as this, the cliche phrase for a while was this moment of inflation, and now it's been a topic and rightly so, in the front of a lot of people's minds for a number of years now.
Right.
Inflation was one of the big issues going into the 2024 presidential election. On our show, we do a segment each week called Voice of the Voter, where we sit down one-on-one with one person throughout Metro Atlanta, and we ask them week after week after week after week, what is your number one issue that's going to govern how you vote in the November election? And I bet you 1 in 3, maybe even more than that, said inflation.
Right.
National polls bear that out too.
Right, right.
Democrats suffered a bad loss in November. Republicans now control the House, the Senate, the Oval Office, and not as a direct result of the 2024 presidential election, but nonetheless also control a majority of the seats in the United States Supreme Court. Where do national Democrats, and by proxy state Democrats like yourself, go from here as a party?
That's a really good question. And now we're starting to have a conversation about the issues themselves versus how the issues are represented and how they're sold.
Let's talk about both of them.
So this is a long form show, so we can get it a little more into the weeds than the normal soundbite, right? I remember a poll from the campaign season that had 3 findings all in the same poll that I found fascinating in conjunction with one another. Costs were people's biggest issues. They supported tariffs. A majority supported tariffs in the poll that I saw. But the same majority thought that tariffs would increase costs. So how can you square that the same poll said, costs are my biggest issue, but I support tariffs, and I think tariffs will increase costs, right? Kind of a riddle, right, to solve. I think the big answer to that is consistency of messaging. What the Republicans did during the campaign trail was just hammer tariffs are good for the economy, immigration reform, good for the economy. And they won on those issues because they consistently said the same thing over and over and over again. And even if logically you can't square some of those things together, I think enough voters heard, let's try something new, let's do tariffs, let's do immigration. Maybe that will be the economic fix that I'm looking for. Now, that's all messaging, right? How issues are represented. Let's talk about what's really happening now. Where is the price of eggs? I mean, if you've been to Waffle House in the last 2 weeks, you know about the surcharge, right? New surcharge on eggs because with bird flu, with supply issues, now eggs cost a multiple of what they did during campaign season when that was a big talking point, right? Just the basic cost of groceries. So those costs are already going up. Businesses are very worried about the tariffs that are going into effect that have been announced. And the concern seems to be that the Trump administration is moving so far, so fast on some of its move fast and break things philosophy, some of the policy points that it was pursuing, that we're not even doing the version of the policies that Trump sold us. We're doing this accelerated, reckless version where we're watching everything change so rapidly in real time. I don't think that the voting public ultimately is going to have confidence after watching this bear out for a few months that this is either what Trump promised exactly he would do, it's a different version of it, or that it's a good idea, that it's going to lead to stable results for people. Now you ask, what can state legislators do about this? The state budget and state law give us some opportunities to give relief, but we have to be careful about how we do it. So for example, state Republicans say they want to decrease the state income tax even further. We were at 6%, and now they're bringing it further down into the 5s. Well, that sounds good to people on paper, and I've voted for state tax relief before, but let's really think about where those gains go. If you're a working family and you get a state income tax rebate of $30-something, great. I mean, that's money, but it's let's go out to dinner once, maybe, right? Whereas the high income earners who get that same state income tax relief are getting thousands of dollars back. And this is at a time when our prisons are in crisis, our behavioral health programs are in crisis, when hundreds of thousands of Georgians are uninsured because we still haven't expanded Medicaid. I mean, we have real crises at the state level that directly affect those cost issues that voters voted on in the last presidential election. But we're not doing as much as we could. We have over $10 billion in surplus money at the state level that we could be using to do more direct relief for working families who need it. We could be expanding the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is a federal program that we could do at the state level to give families in certain income brackets more of their money back from state taxes. Those are targeted relief efforts that help the people who need it most, as opposed to just slashing government, giving back income tax money without thinking about the ways that we could be fixing broken systems with it. So, really this is about messaging. At the end of the day, Democrats do have a plan, have many plans, to directly affect the cost issue for working families. The problem is that if our debates get reduced down to 30-second sound bites, and if President Trump's megaphone is the loudest and his party is all on the same page saying the exact same thing, then we get what? Tariffs and immigration. But like I said just a minute ago, I think we're about to see a few months into this presidency, the tariffs and immigration pathways to cost control are just not going to bear out the way that President Trump promised.
There are those who have also said that the Democratic Party as a whole right now has a pretty wide range of different ideologies encompassed within the broad tent that it casts, from very liberal, very progressive folks to more traditional centrist Democrats. And there are the people, particularly in the aftermath of any big election, like there always are, there are people who have argued that that schism pulled attention, pulled funding, pulled focus in opposite directions when a campaign on the other side, the Republican campaign, whether you liked what it was saying or not, was pretty consistently on its chosen message. Do you buy that criticism?
Well, so when you do this job for long enough, you get to appreciate how diverse and complex the American public, the Georgia public, are. I mean, I joke about, I'll go to a door, knock on a door, and a woman wearing yoga pants will say, you know, I love guns, right? I mean, I think there are certain cultural stereotypes that we think neatly apply to a bunch of people, but people are so interesting and diverse across the board that we really should not be putting people into boxes, because that's not good leadership, and it doesn't really honor the who we are of being an American. What I think does happen, though, is that messages get simplified in political parties. So, like I said, Republicans ran on these very brute force, simple messages of tariffs and immigration. And unfortunately, both of those messages had to do with fear of or distrust of people who are different from us, right? People outside of us. If we can just keep those other people away, whether it's, you know, immigrants from our housing, or whether it's, you know, people who are competing for jobs, that kind of thing, then everything will just be better. And I think what the next 4 years are about to prove is that our diversity is our strength, that our welcoming nature, our commitment to the rule of law, those are the traditions that not only make America great in like a moral sense, but also make us more successful in an economic and a business sense. Look at what the Trump's administration is doing to DEI, right? He's made DEI some kind of a slur word, but all it means is diversity, equity, inclusion. If you ask billionaires like Mark Cuban, they're saying, I love an initiative that gives me access to a wider array of people to look at and to choose from, rather than just a certain pipeline from a certain school or institution. Let's really consider all the diverse talent that's out there. Why? So that I can find the best people, so that I can run the business as efficiently and as successfully as possible. So I really think that what Democrats need to do is find our energy, find our zeal for the very institutions that we fear are under attack right now, that we're defending. You can't just say the other guy's bad, the other guy's doing all this bad stuff, the things I like. You've got to explain to the public why we like those things. Why do we care that Congress controls the power of the purse, and that when Congress appropriates money, separation of powers requires that the president spend it. Elon Musk can't just run around deciding not to spend money that Congress has allocated. If you want to fix it, you go to Congress. But we've got to be excited in telling the public we still have a constitutional republic, a rule of law that's worth defending, because it guarantees our rights, it guarantees our economic success, and we don't have to resort to fear of the other, fear of difference of other people to try to improve our own situation. But again, that's hard. I mean, it's very difficult to get, as you put it, a broad, diverse coalition on board with the same messaging. And I think that the Republican coalition and the Democratic coalition have, you know, their own types of diversity and broad swaths of the American public behind them. But I can tell you those voters in the center and the voters that we're trying to attract to build a bigger coalition, they know strength when they see it. And we are only going to be strong as Democrats if we can find passion and purpose in the messaging that we're sending.
You mentioned diversity. During the 2024 presidential campaign, now President Donald Trump was very critical of, in many aspects, transgender rights. The first bill in your chamber this year, SB 1, if passed into law, would, broadly speaking, restrict and keep out of girls' sports people who identify as trans girls. There's been a lot of Republican support and a few Democrats who've supported that bill. Where do you stand on it?
I opposed that bill because I'm worried about the big picture. Let me first talk about what I think is happening with the discussion about trans people and trans rights in this country. We can talk about sports if you want, if we get to that specific conversation, but everything has context. And trans people are the favorite punching bag that the Republican Party has chosen, both at the federal level and at the state level, again, to try to advance this agenda of making people afraid of each other and worried that we're all competing for the same rights and opportunities, okay? So let me give you an example. Chris Carr, Georgia's Attorney General, signed onto a lawsuit that I think 17 states signed onto, that the main purpose was to reverse a Biden-era regulation about trans people. But what did the lawsuit also do? Count 3 of the lawsuit says all Section 504 plans under the Rehabilitation Act from the 70s are unconstitutional. Now, what does that mean? Every student in a public school that's got what's called a 504 plan for any disability at all, cerebral palsy, ADHD, right? Any disability you could imagine, that plan is under threat by this lawsuit. So think about how that worked. The reason why all these Republican attorneys general signed on to this lawsuit is because it was a political talking point about trans people in the first 2 counts of the lawsuit. But buried in that lawsuit was an attack on all disability rights. And so when we say things like, you know, if you come for one group, eventually you're going to start coming for other groups because that's how animus works, that's what's at work here. And
now, I hate to interrupt, but we just, you know, because people are going to watch this interview full through, we should be clear here.
Sure.
AG Carr and I know other attorneys general around the country have said, that their focus was on the gender dysphoria final rule, not on convincing a court to find Section 504 facially unconstitutional. They have said that that was not their intention.
Focus maybe, I mean, okay, in the sense that counts 1 and 2 are the first counts.
Well, you're not buying it.
Count 3 is that the whole thing's unconstitutional. It's in the lawsuit. If you didn't want to get rid of all of Section 504, then why did you tell a federal court, that all of Section 504 is unconstitutional? So just because they can't get away with, oh, it was only count 3, so it's only the 3rd most important thing, so you shouldn't pay any attention to it. Somebody on their team got their hands on the complaint and put in an ideologically driven attack on all federal anti-discrimination rights for people with disabilities under 504. So again, the point I'm trying to make is consistent with what you're saying, which is you might have some people in the coalition on their side that say, oh, but we just want to focus on trans people. That's our political talking point. But that will be used as a vehicle to launch an attack on more people than just the people that some people are focusing on. So again, I'm trying to make this point. Look, we talk about, and this is going to sound, I'm talking big picture, but we talk about remembering the Holocaust, you talk about remembering some of the worst atrocities, and there's always this conversation about our words become our actions become our habits, and if we let one group, whether it's Jewish people or black people, whatever a minority group is that might be under attack, if you just look the other way and say, well, I'm not that worried about that group, or I don't understand that group, if that's the attitude the public has, there's very little over time that stops that animus from spreading into a larger problem for society. So this is what we mean when we say that when we're working for justice and we're working for equality for all people, there's nobody you can leave out of that. And so again, you can have specific policy debates about sports or whatever you want, but what are Senate Republicans in Georgia also doing this year? Bills to take away health care from trans people. Now that's not sports. And
this is specifically gender-affirming care.
Correct. That's
provided by a state health care plan.
Sure, but if the Republican majority had its way, they would probably prevent doctors from assigning gender-affirming care of any kind, even in the privacy of your own home. These are all steps in the direction of basically saying, the Republicans are saying we don't want to acknowledge that this type of person even exists or that they have a legitimate right to health care. I guarantee you, I haven't looked at polling data, this morning or anything, but I guarantee you that the vast majority of Americans do not mind what other Americans do in the privacy of their home, living their lives, the health care that they want to get in consultation with a doctor, under their own privacy, if it's not going to affect other people, right? I mean, that's the real liberty focused mindset. And so that's the team I'm on, is at least for the civil liberties, the rights, the freedom for people to live in the way that's going to give them the best expression of their lives. And what I really don't like, what I really resent, is that there are people out there, some of whom are in our government, who want to use a minority group who is trying to live their best life to avoid higher rates of being attacked, higher rates of suicide and of mental health issues, to deny those people their right to live their best lives, to me, is abhorrent.
I want to end here with 2 last things. One, micro level in some ways, one macro level. So let's start at the pseudo micro level, the state level here. We've talked about a lot of the things on your mind. If you had to name your single biggest priority for the remainder of this session, for you, what would it be?
Well, there's the big ticket stuff that you get whole teams of people to work on, and then there's sort of the stuff that individual legislators work on. The big picture team stuff, that I want to get a whole group of people together to work on because they're big issues, is we want to keep that push for Medicaid expansion going. You hear a lot of exhaustion from Governor Kemp and the majority from talking about it because they would like to just put it to bed. But this is something that's been on the table for over 10 years under the Affordable Care Act, to have the state pay for the federal government to pay for 90% of the costs of giving hundreds of thousands of people basic health care in Georgia. And we all benefit from that because the indigent care problem at our hospitals that are closing down, rural hospitals, we obviously had a Wellstar hospital closed in the Atlanta area. Had we expanded Medicaid a decade ago, these just wouldn't have happened, these closures, because that uncompensated care is how the hospital has to drive up prices for everybody else basically to pay for it, right? So if we were to give people a basic safety net in this state, and of course Senators Ossoff and Warnock have sweetened the pot by getting even more federal money, a couple $2 billion, right, to be available if Georgia expands as a signing bonus. So that's obviously something like that is the most obvious, easiest lift that we could do to go ahead and improve the situation dramatically for hundreds of thousands of people. Now, privately, I have been known to pursue the booting issue, booting of cars. This was a conversation the last couple of years, and I'm not pursuing booting. I'm pursuing an end to predatory booting practices, to be 100% clear. But we all know if you go out to eat or you're out on the town for any reason, and maybe you parked in the spot for rack room shoes, you're trying to go to Ross Dress for Less, and if you're in the store for 4 minutes, the boot man is waiting for you, and he throws a boot on your car, and it's $75, and you don't get to argue with him, and by the time you're done with it, you don't file a lawsuit or try to get any help for it because you're just glad it's over, right? How many people have had that story? Well, I've got a common sense regulation bill that I'm trying to get out of the Senate this year that would prevent booting companies from monitoring lots or from paying kickbacks to property owners. A lot of people don't realize that's happening, that property owners are in some cases profiting as well. So that's a common sense consumer protection bill. And the towing industry has those same regulations, so I just want to match up the booting industry to the towing industry. The other issue I'm working on is veterans' mental health. There are breakthrough therapies for post-traumatic stress that a lot of veterans experience and first responders after being in the field. And we need to be looking at new options. This is something I know RFK has talked about, but we need to be using every option available to us to try to help the persistent, treatment-resistant PTS, post-traumatic stress, that a lot of our finest people are experiencing. So I'm on the Veterans Committee, so that's been a big priority for me as well.
This is the first time you and I have chatted.
Right.
You seem like a guy who's got a lot of passion, a lot of energy for what you're working on. You also seem like a guy who's got some pretty big worries going into 2025 and when you look ahead. I see you nodding your head when you're...
Sure, yeah.
What are you worried about?
If we don't pay attention as a country to what's happening at the federal level, at the state level, if we just assume that things will be business as usual, that we can keep going to our schools, keep going to our jobs, somebody's got it taken care of, but we're not staying engaged. We're not watching what our Congress people are doing, what the president's doing, what apparently now Elon Musk is doing. We could lose our republic. And that sounds dramatic, but every generation has to recommit itself to good government and civic engagement. There's a dear friend who is a judge at a retirement home in my district who passed away recently, and a lot of people of the state were mourning her passing. But I remember the last conversation she and I had, her number one issue was civic education in schools, to make sure that our kids are learning not just what the three branches of government are, what they do, but learning that it's a republic if you can keep it. We have to pay attention or else somebody else is going to make all these decisions for us, and before long, the things that we take for granted may not be there.
That's a serious thing to say out loud.
It is, and what I really hope is that for all the people who think a president's just a president, an administration's just administration, that they ask themselves, if the other team were doing this, if the other political party were doing X, Y, Z, would it upset me more? But it's just not because it's my party, right? I would hope that if a Democrat did something that I found objectionable, that I thought was threatening the system, that I would say something about it, right? I mean, that's the commitment we all have to have. Is George Washington, right, was worried that political parties would destroy the republic even at that young age, right? And we've made it over 200 years, but we have grown so distrustful of our neighbor, of people from the other party, that in some cases we have people who are willing to side with Russia or side with our adversaries as opposed to siding with Americans first, siding with members of the other political party. And I just think that's really dangerous. And listen, I want to be very clear. I've got tons of Republican friends in the General Assembly. We vote together, we laugh together on a number of issues. So this is something I've been trying to cultivate in my own life, is that bipartisan sense of friendship and coalition building. But I can't do it on my own here at the Capitol. I need help protecting these institutions from all the various people in our communities who, again, go to school, go to work, and interact with all different types of people. We all have to be committed to this goal so that we don't devolve into distrust and fear.
I just want to make sure you're really clear, because you're saying some pretty serious stuff. Those are, I mean, sound like legitimately worried about the future of the United States as a democratic republic. What specifically makes you worry about that right now?
The so-called Department of Government Efficiency, DOG, is violating all manner of federal laws, firing people illegally who have civil service protections. They fired the people who are taking care of our nuclear weapons right now, and then they realize what they did and they try to claw them back. Same thing with bird flu. They accidentally fired the people who were responsible for containing bird flu and had to figure out how to get those people back. That is in violation of federal law. Freezing spending by Congress that Congress has authorized, in violation of federal law. 1,300 CDC employees fired, including disease response teams, because of ideology and wanting to move fast and break things. Courts are already ordering the federal government not to do some of this stuff, but the administration's trying to wiggle out of those court orders by claiming that they've got other authority and other reasons to do it. We have legal scholars across the country who are already using the phrase constitutional crisis to describe what's happening. Now again, this sounds nerdy and esoteric and it's just government stuff. But the way it really affects us is, if the Supreme Court, let's say these things get to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rules, President Trump, Elon Musk, you can't do this stuff. And then they ignore those orders.
That's a big if. Let's be clear. We're not there. That has not happened.
But with trial courts, there has been some wiggle room, and some, trial court issued an order end of January, and 2 weeks later it wasn't being followed, right? And had to come back. And this is a Rhode Island district court to say there will be consequences if, but the U.S. Marshals who work for the courts, right? No, they actually work for the executive branch. They enforce court orders. So again, it really just goes back to this idea of buy-in. I mean, I don't want to send an alarmist message. What I want to say is this. If we all, in addition to going to school, going to work, watching football, if we all voted, if we all called our representatives every once in a while, if we watched the news, if we paid any attention to what was happening, and if everybody did that, we could have a peaceful country where the right things happened. My concern, just like the judge I told you about, who her last wish to me as her representative was, we needed to do something about civic education. My concern is just that if we're not present, if we don't show up, then we are going to let our country be run by people, maybe billionaires in this case, who don't have our best interests in mind.
Senator, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate it.